I stood there in nothing but my thin night robe bathed in soft amber light, and the breath of a man I used to know. When he stepped closer, placed his hand gently on the back of my neck, and whispered, "If you don't want this, just say so." I didn't step back. I had waited for that question for years, and when his lips found mine, every wall I'd built quietly fell. No past. No roles, just two people. Finally done pretending my name is Margaret, and I'm 63 years old for the past 8 years. I've lived alone in a modest cedarwood home just a few miles from the edge of the Pacific, nestled between the cliffs and coastal trails of Mendocino, California. It's not a grand place, but it's mine quiet, filled with wind chimes and morning fog, a fridge that hums too loudly, and windows that know how to catch the golden light just before sunset. My 2 children live on opposite coasts, now grown kind, successful in their own ways, and they check in often enough that I don't worry. At least not aloud. I've learned to enjoy the stillness. My early morning teas walks through the wildflower path behind the house, the old jazz records I still keep from college, and the ocean. The ocean never lies to you. I used to believe that was enough until last weekend. It had been raining most of that Friday, when the phone rang in. Unfamiliar number, but the voice on the other end wasn't Jack, my late husband's closest friend from their university days. We'd exchanged the occasional Christmas card, a birthday message here and there, but nothing more than formal reminders of a past we both knew too well. He was on a solo road trip down the Pacific coast. He said, driving through Northern California, "Thought of you." He added, his voice gentle but clear, "Would it be all right if I stopped by?" I said yes, without hesitation, not because I expected anything but because something in his voice, something I hadn't heard in a long time, made me wonder if it was time I stopped pretending. I was completely fine by the time Jack arrived the next afternoon. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle, like the sky wasn't quite ready to let go, but had made peace with the idea of surrender. He parked his car just outside the gate, stepped out, with a weathered duffel slung over one shoulder, and smiled like no time had passed. I hadn't seen him in nearly 20 years. He was taller than I remembered, or maybe I had just forgotten how much space he could quietly command. The silver in his beard caught the soft light through the trees, and he looked like a man who had learned to carry both stories and silence in equal measure. There was something familiar in his eyes, but something new too. A gravity I couldn't name. "Yet I hope you still like Darjeeling," I said, motioning him inside. Ashy shook the rain from his jacket. "Only when it's made by someone who remember. Shall I take it?" he replied, and there was a softness to his words that landed warmer than I expected. We talked over tea, by the window watching the fog roll in from the water. The conversation moved easily, at first about Tom, about memories Weboth kept in separate corners of our lives, then slowly into the present. Jack had been divorced for 6 years. No kids, semi-retired, still played the piano, still hated small talk, still carried that notebook in his coat pocket. He never let anyone read. Later I warmed up a simple dinner, rosemary chicken and wild rice, something I always made too much of, and we sat by the fire, the air between us growing quieter, but not uncomfortable. At one point, he reached across the table to pour more wine, and his fingers brushed mine like casual, but enough to steal my breath for just a second. He didn't pull away immediately, and I didn't either. Then the moment passed. We both looked away, as if neither of us wanted to admit that something small but irreversible had just shifted. That night, I tried to sleep, but the storm outside wasn't the only thing keeping me awake. Downstairs, faint music floated up through the house. Something, low and slow-brushed percussion, and upright bassy padded to the top of the stairs. In my robe, heart beating a little faster than it should, Jack was still awake, sitting alone by the fire, a record turning slowly, a glass of wine in hand, and an expression that told me he wasn't just passing through. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there, one hand resting on the wooden railing. watching the way the firelight traced the angles of his face. He looked up when he heard the floor creak beneath my steps, but he didn't seem surprised to see me there, if anything. He looked patient. The hem of my robe grazed my knees as I made my way down the room felt warmer than it had earlier. Or maybe that was just me aware of every inch of skin, beneath the silk of every heartbeat that refused to quiet down. I stood a few feet away from him, barefoot on the rug, and for a moment neither of us moved. "You always did have good taste in music," he said softly. He smiled, but it faded, slowly, as his eyes lingered too long, too openly. "You look," he stopped himself, then added, "beautiful. Even now especially." Now the words felt like something I hadn't let myself need. I didn't smile, I didn't look away. I just waited. Jack stood up slowly, set his glass down on the coffee table and stepped toward me. "If you don't want this," he said. His voice low and rough, say something, and I couldn't instead. I whispered, "I've been waiting for that question. Longer than you think." What happened next didn't feel like seduction. It felt like gravity finally doing its job, pulling two bodies that had been circling each other for years into the center of something neither of us could undo. His lips met mine like he already knew every part of me, and yet still wanted to discover them again. My hands found the back of his neck. His fingers pulled at the tie of my robe. He pressed me gently against the kitchen counter, his breath hot at my collarbone, his mouth pausing at my shoulder as if to ask again, and this time I answered. Not with words, but with the way my body opened to him fully, finally, without hesitation. "If you're still with me, and this story has your heart beating just a little faster, consider showing some love with a super chat or super sticker. Your support helps us keep telling bold, beautiful stories like this one. Thank you for staying." That night we didn't rush. There was no frantic need. Only deep, deliberate movements, the kind that come from years of restraint, of knowing what it means to truly earn someone's surrender. He didn't ask me to pretend to be younger, and I didn't ask him to forget who we used to be. We just stopped pretending. I woke to the sound of seagulls calling in the distance and the faint scent of toast gone too dark. The light filtering through the curtains was different that morning. Less fog, more gold for a moment. I stayed in bed, letting the memory of the night wrap around me like a second blanket. My body was sore in the best kind of way, and my lips still tingled faintly from where his had found them over and over. I could hear Jack humming to himself in the kitchen, badly off key, just like he used to in his college days. I pulled on a soft sweater and walked barefoot down the hallway. Heart, strangely, light. He was at the stove, frowning at a pan of charred toast. When he turned and saw me, his face lit up, not in shock, not in uncertainty, but with a smile that said he'd hoped I'd still be here. "Breakfast," he declared proudly, holding up a pan like it was a trophy, slightly burnt. I laughed genuinely. "Well, I guess some things don't change." He raised an eyebrow. "Not true. Some things get better with time." Later that day we trimmed the overgrown lavender bush in the front yard. Jack wrestled with a stubborn root, lost his balance, and landed squarely on his backside in the mud. I laughed so hard I had to hold my ribs. He looked up. "Mock offended. I've survived car crashes and corporate layoffs, but apparently I lose to a lavender plant." "You'll live," I teased, handing him a hand towel, barely. There was no talk of what last night meant, but in the silence between moments in the way, he reached for my hand, without needing to look. I began to understand. Something we weren't just reliving. Something we were rewriting it from the quiet places that had gone untouched for years. Something tender and new was beginning to bloom that evening. We sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the last pink threads of sunlight dissolve into the Pacific. The air was cool, salt heavy, and quiet in the kind of way only coastal evenings can be. Neither of us spoke for a long while. I think we were both afraid that putting words to it might break whatever fragile understanding we had found. But eventually, Jack cleared his throat, a low, thoughtful sound that stirred the stillness. "I was supposed to be back on the road by now," he said, His hand tightened gently around mine, but I can't quite bring myself to leave. Just yet I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned my head against his shoulder, listening to the slow rhythm of his breathing and the distant crashing of waves. Then I said, almost without thinking, "Then don't." "Oh." He turned toward me, and there was something in his eyes, something boyish, almost nervous. "Would it be too soon to ask if you'd want to make this more than just a weekend thing?" I smiled. Not because the question surprised me, but because it didn't. We had stepped off the edge of the map the night before, and now we were standing in a place neither of us thought we'd ever return to possibility. I didn't answer with words. I leaned in, kissed him softly, slow and certain, and stayed there just long enough to tell him yes. This wasn't a pause. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a beginning. As the stars emerged one by one overhead, Jack pulled the blanket tighter around us, and we sat there, two people who had lost so much, but still, somehow found each other at the edge of everything. The next morning, after pancakes and 2 cups of strong coffee, I called my daughter. I didn't plan to tell her much. Maybe just that Jack had visited that. We'd caught up over dinner, but as soon as she heard his name, her voice sharpened like a radar locking in. "Wait, Jack, Dad's best friend. Jack, that Jack." I hesitated, Mama, she said slowly. "Suspicious now. Why do you sound like someone who just got laid for the first time in 10 years? I nearly choked on my coffee." There was a pause. Then her voice turned into that of an amused daughter who knew me too well. "Oh my God, you did, didn't you?" I laughed, really laughed for the first time in ages, honey. It's been 8 years, I think, that qualifies me for a medal, not a lecture. She groaned. "Okay. You, but good for you." I grinned. "I'll take that as a blessing. And honestly, that was all I needed. There is no expiration date on intimacy connection, or the quiet thrill of being truly seen. You don't owe anyone an explanation for wanting to feel alive again. Whether you're 63 or 25, you deserve a story that still surprises you if you stayed with me through this whole journey. If you smiled, felt something stir, or maybe even blushed a little, consider supporting the channel with a super chat or super sticker. Every bit helps us keep sharing bold, emotional, and deeply human stories like this, and thank you for still believing in second chances.